Did you know? A tragic incident occurred at the Ben-Hur movie filming location, resulting in the deaths of 15 individuals. From Gone with the Wind's fiery chaos to Ben-Hur's deadly chariot races, these iconic films hide a world of danger behind the curtain. Buckle up, because the real story behind your favorite classics is more thrilling and terrifying than you could imagine. Let's go. Ben-Hur, 1925. In 1924, MGM mounted an epic production of Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, only to find real danger in its quest for on-screen glory. The most perilous sequence was the famous chariot race, initially filmed on location at Rome's ancient Circus Maximus. As 12 horse-drawn chariots thundered around the track, disaster struck on the second lap. 2 chariots collided and overturned, entangling horses and drivers in a brutal pileup. 1 stunt racer was killed outright, and several others were gravely injured in the melee. Over a dozen horses suffered catastrophic injuries. Animal handlers had to shoot many of them where they lay to untangle the wrecked rigs. Silent-era star Francis X. Bushman, who portrayed the villain Masala, witnessed the carnage and later recalled much blood on the track. This calamity in Italy, along with earlier mishaps during a sea battle scene, where extras in heavy armor nearly drowned and had to be rescued from the water, prompted MGM to halt the overseas shoot. Producer Irving Thalberg moved the production back to Hollywood, rebuilding the Circus Maximus on a Culver City backlot in a bid to regain control. Filming resumed in 1925 under tightened oversight, and the chariot race was successfully reshot. But the dangers faced in Italy left an indelible mark. Ben-Hur's staggering budget and human cost made headlines. It premiered in late 1925 as the most expensive silent film ever made, thrilling audiences with its realism, even as Hollywood quietly reckoned with the fatal risks that realism had entailed. The legacy of Ben-Hur's set would endure as a cautionary tale, a spectacle achieved through genuine peril, in an era when the pursuit of cinematic glory too often trumped safety. Noah's Ark, 1928. By the late 1920s, Hollywood's appetite for grand spectacle led to one of its deadliest production disasters on the set of Noah's Ark. Directed by Michael Curtis for Warner Brothers, this biblical epic called for a colossal recreation of the Great Flood. In November 1928, Curtis oversaw the flooding of an enormous indoor set with an estimated 600,000 gallons of water. Thousands of costumed extras, including future stars like John Wayne, were enlisted to flail in the deluge as roaring water engulfed them. Curtis's obsession with realism overrode safety. Actress Dolores Costello, who led the film, later recalled that Curtis placed real human extras in the path of solid, non-collapsing set pieces, while positioning lifeless dummies where the flimsy breakaway structures were, all in the name of realism. When the torrent was unleashed, chaos followed. The water came in with such force that it toppled props and trapped performers. Dozens were injured in the churning flood. One extra's leg was shattered so badly it required amputation. Most tragically, at least 3 extras drowned amid the confusion, unable to reach safety in time. Contemporary reports describe panic on set as crew members desperately tried to rescue those swept away. Despite the horrific cost, Curtis got his shot. The flood scene is terrifyingly convincing on film. But the incident had serious repercussions. Outrage in the industry and public prompted Warner Brothers and other studios to rethink on-set safety. In fact, the following year, Hollywood adopted new safety regulations, partly as a result of the Noah's Ark tragedy. Noah's Ark was released in early 1929, with the grim distinction of having sacrificed real lives for its biblical spectacle. The film's legacy endures as a sobering example of Hollywood's early disregard for safety, a blockbuster disaster movie that disastrously crossed the line between illusion and reality. The Trail of 98, 1928. MGM's The Trail of 98, an adventurous tale of fortune seekers braving the Klondike Gold Rush. became notorious for deadly authenticity during its location filming. In the summer of 1927, director Clarence Brown took his crew to the wilds of Alberta and Alaska to capture real wilderness perils on camera. The climax called for prospectors navigating ferocious river rapids, so Brown staged the sequence at the remote Abercrombie Rapids between Miles and Childs Glaciers in Alaska. Multiple expert stuntmen were hired to run the churning waters in boats, while cameras rolled from the banks. On the day of the shoot, the glacial river lived up to its fury. A boat carrying a team of stunt performers was caught in a relentless current and smashed apart. 3 stuntmen, Howard Daughters, Jerome Jerry Botten, and Red Thompson, were hurled into the freezing, foam-white rapids. In an instant, the rushing waters claimed all 3 lives. Their bodies were tossed mercilessly by the torrent and later recovered downstream. The crew was horrified as they watched colleagues vanish in the spray, powerless to help. News of the accident sent shockwaves through Hollywood. MGM added a dedicatory tribute to the film, honoring the men who died. But for the victims' families, that was cold comfort. The Trail of '98 was released in 1928, with these tragic scenes included. A grimly realistic set piece, the studio grimly touted as footage captured under actual Klondike conditions. The consequence of this fatal gamble was a push for more caution on future location shoots. In fact, MGM quietly re-evaluated how far to go for realism after The Trail of '98. Though less remembered by the public today, this film's production stands as one of the first instances where Hollywood stunt work led to multiple on-set deaths, underscoring the lethal hazards early filmmakers courted in pursuit of grandeur. Hell's Angels, 1930. Howard Hughes' World War I aerial epic Hell's Angels set a new bar for dangerous filmmaking. Between 1927 and 1930, Hughes poured millions into spectacular dogfight scenes with real aircraft, and paid a deadly price. Filming took place at Hughes's airfield in California, where squadrons of vintage planes and daredevil pilots reenacted combat in the skies. Hughes insisted on ever more daring maneuvers. During one fateful sequence on March 22, 1929, aviator Al Wilson was piloting a modified Sikorsky S-29A biplane with mechanic Phil Jones on board. Hughes wanted a dramatic spinning nosedive. Wilson put the bomber into a steep spin, but the heavy plane refused to recover. He shouted for Jones to jump, but Jones didn't hear in time. The aircraft spiraled down and smashed into the ground in a fireball, killing both men. Only a few brief seconds of that doomed flight made it into the film. This was just one of the tragedies. Earlier, stunt pilot Clement Phillips died in a separate crash, and pilot Al Johnson was killed when his plane struck high-voltage wires. In total, 3 aviators lost their lives filming Hell's Angels, a staggering toll for one production. Even the director himself wasn't spared. Hughes, an experienced but reckless pilot, took the controls for a low-altitude stunt after professionals warned it was too risky. Predictably, he crashed in a field, crushing his skull and requiring emergency surgery. Hughes survived with scars and a permanently damaged cheekbone. When Hell's Angels finally premiered in 1930, audiences were awed by its aerial battle scenes, unaware that the smoke and flames on screen hid real graves off-screen. The film's success was forever overshadowed by the human cost of its making. In later years, Hollywood studios grew more reluctant to allow such extreme stunts without safeguards, largely because Hell's Angels had shown how easily ambition could turn lethal in the skies above a movie set. Such men are dangerous. 1930. Even as Hell's Angels grabbed headlines, another 1930 aviation film etched its own tragic chapter in Hollywood history. Such Men Are Dangerous, a now obscure Fox adventure directed by Kenneth Hawks, culminated in one of the deadliest accidents ever on a studio production. On January 2, 1930, the crew was filming aerial footage off the Southern California coast near Santa Monica. 2 small biplanes, Both Stinson Detroiters, outfitted as camera ships, took off to capture a mid-air scene. Each plane carried a pilot and several film crew members, including director Kenneth Hawks in one, and cinematographer Conrad Wells, and other technicians in the other. As the pair of planes flew over the ocean, something went horribly wrong. The two aircraft collided in mid-air. Witnesses on the ground saw a flash of metal and then watched in horror as both planes plunged into the sea. There were no survivors. All 10 men aboard the aircraft were killed, among them Director Hawks, Assistant Director Max Gold, cinematographers Wells and George Eastman, cameramen Otto Jordan and Ben Frankel, 2 property men, and both pilots. The disaster was unprecedented, a single incident wiping out an entire unit. Recovery efforts managed to find only 5 bodies. The rest were lost to the Pacific depths. Production on Such Men Are Dangerous was nearly complete, so the studio quietly finished the film using existing footage, and it was released on schedule later that year. The families of the victims sued Fox for negligence, but the courts ruled the crash an accident and cleared the studio of liability. In Hollywood, the calamity sent shockwaves through the filmmaking community. Stricter precautions for aerial filming were discussed industry-wide after the incident. While Such Men Are Dangerous itself faded into obscurity, its legacy endures as a sobering reminder of the extreme risks early filmmakers took and the lives that were lost in the name of entertainment. The Viking, 1931. In 1931, an adventurous film crew sailed into the icy North Atlantic to shoot The Viking, a drama set among Newfoundland seal hunters, and sailed straight into tragedy. Directed by Varric Frissell, a fearless Canadian documentarian, The Viking had wrapped principal photography in Newfoundland and New York. But Frissell wanted more real ice footage to heighten the film's authenticity. In March 1931, he embarked on a dangerous extra expedition. Frissell, cinematographer Alexander Penrod, and a small crew joined a real sealing ship, the SS Viking, to capture shots of the Labrador ice floes. As winter winds howled, the Viking became locked in pack ice near Horse Islands off Newfoundland's coast on March 15, 1931. The ship had a cache of dynamite on board, intended to blast free of ice if needed. Without warning, the explosives ignited. Some speculate a cigarette or sparks set them off. And the Viking was rocked by a massive explosion. The blast tore the ship apart, hurling wood and iron and claiming dozens of lives in an instant. Varric Frissell, just 28 years old, was among those killed, as was Penrod, his cameraman. In total, 27 men died in the explosion, making it one of the deadliest incidents in film production history. The news sent shock and grief through both Hollywood and Canada. The Viking was eventually released posthumously, dedicated to Frissell's memory. The haunting irony was that the extra footage Frissell died trying to obtain was never even used. This catastrophe prompted studios to re-evaluate the wisdom of such on-location zeal. No movie was considered worth the loss of so many lives. In the aftermath, production companies grew more cautious about sending filmmakers into uncontrolled, life-threatening environments. The Viking's ill-fated voyage thus stands as a tragic lesson from the early sound era. Sometimes the greatest adventure a film crew faces is far outside the script, in the unforgiving hands of nature itself. The Charge of the Light Brigade, 1936. Warner Brothers' swashbuckling cavalry epic. The Charge of the Light Brigade in 1936 is remembered for its rousing action and for a notorious disregard of safety that led to both human and animal suffering. Filmed under director Michael Curtis, the production's climactic charge sequence sought to recreate the Crimean War's famous doomed assault. Dozens of riders on horseback thundered across a huge battlefield set in California. To simulate the chaos of war, Curtis employed tripwires to deliberately trip galloping horses, causing them to somersault violently. The result on camera was dramatic, horses tumbling end over end as if cut down by cannon fire. The result of the camera was carnage. By the end of shooting, scores of horses had been injured or killed by this cruel method. Contemporary sources put the equine death toll at over 100, and some modern estimates claim it exceeded 200 animals. During one take, tragedy also struck a human stuntman. As recounted in studio records and crew testimonies, a stunt rider fell from his saddle in mid-charge and landed chest first onto a broken prop sword that was planted in the ground. The blade impaled him. The grievously injured stuntman was rushed to a Los Angeles hospital, but he died from the wound hours later. Star Errol Flynn was reportedly devastated by the on-set death and outraged by the treatment of the horses. Jesse James, 1939. A single shocking stunt in Jesse James, 20th Century Fox's Technicolor Western, brought about permanent change in Hollywood's treatment of animals on set. The film, starring Tyrone Power and Henry Fonda, included a sequence in which Jesse's gang escapes by jumping horses off a high bluff into a river below. To capture this dramatic moment, director Henry King's team actually made a horse and rider go over a cliff on location in Missouri. On the first take, veteran stuntman Cliff Lyons doubled for the outlaw character and spurred his horse off the steep embankment into the water. The result was horrific. The terrified horse, reportedly blinded with a hood to force it forward, lost its footing and plummeted awkwardly into the river. The animal's spine was broken upon impact, and it drowned or had to be euthanized shortly after. Lyons survived the fall, but the horse did not. Outraged crew members leaked news of the incident, and animal welfare advocates were appalled. The American Humane Association, which had been pushing for better oversight, used Jesse James as a rallying cry. Public protests erupted when word spread that a horse was killed purely for a movie scene. Under pressure, Fox added a small on-screen disclaimer expressing regret about the horse, but the damage was done. In early 1940, partly as a result of this uproar, the AHA opened a dedicated Hollywood office to monitor the use of animals in films. For the first time, productions were routinely assigned Humane Society observers, and scripts involving animal stunts underwent review. The industry slowly adopted guidelines to ensure animal safety. For example, the notorious tripwires were banned in the 1940s. Jesse James was a box office hit, but its legacy off-screen outshone its story. To this day, the "no animals were harmed" disclaimer at the end of movies owes its existence to the tragic leap of that horse in Jesse James, making this one of Hollywood's most consequential and cautionary on-set incidents. The Wizard of Oz, 1939. MGM's The Wizard of Oz may be a beloved fantasy on screen, but life on its set was anything but magical for some of its cast. The production was riddled with hazards that left multiple people badly hurt. The most harrowing incident occurred on December 23, 1938, during filming of The Wicked Witch's fiery exit from Munchkinland. Actress Margaret Hamilton, playing the green-skinned Wicked Witch of the West, was supposed to disappear in a burst of flame and smoke, dropping through a hidden trapdoor as pyrotechnics erupted. On one take, the timing misfired. Literally. The special effects blaze ignited too soon, engulfing Hamilton in flames before she had fully dropped below the stage. Her copper-based green makeup only intensified the burn. Hamilton suffered second-degree burns to her face and third-degree burns on her right hand. She was rushed off set, and the studio doctor administered emergency care that likely saved her eyes and lungs. The actress spent 6 weeks recuperating. Though she valiantly returned to finish the film, Hamilton bore scars and swore never to work with fire again. As if that weren't enough, her stand-in and stunt double, Betty Danko, was injured filming a different dangerous scene. Danko sat astride a prop metal broomstick, rigged to billow smoke for the witch's skywriting sequence. The rig exploded beneath her without warning, violently throwing her off. She landed hard, fracturing her pelvis and suffering permanent leg scarring from the blast. Danko spent 11 days hospitalized and had lasting injuries. Another casualty of Oz was actor Buddy Ebsen, originally cast as the Tin Man. The silver makeup he wore contained toxic aluminum dust. After days of inhaling it, Ebsen collapsed, and he nearly died of respiratory failure. He was hospitalized in critical condition and had to abandon the role. Ebsen's lungs remained sensitive for life. On top of these, there were lesser injuries. The Cowardly Lion's heavy costume caused heat exhaustion, and toxic asbestos snow fell on the cast in one scene. The Wizard of Oz was ultimately completed and released to moderate success in 1939, with little public knowledge of the hazards endured during its making. But within MGM and the industry, the film became an example of how even a glossy musical could hide nightmarish workplace safety issues. Its behind-the-curtain stories eventually emerged over the years, reminding us that the yellow brick road was paved with very real danger for those who brought Oz to life. They died with their boots on. 1941. Warner Brothers. They Died with Their Boots On, a dramatic chronicle of General Custer starring Errol Flynn, featured a large-scale cavalry charge scene that proved fatal for multiple people. Filming the finale in 1941, director Raoul Walsh marshaled dozens of mounted extras to recreate Custer's last stand with authentically chaotic flair. During one intense take of the battle, amid thundering hooves and simulated gunfire, a series of tragic accidents occurred in quick succession. 3 horsemen were killed after being unseated from their horses at full gallop. The most infamous victim was 40-year-old Jack Budlong, not a professional stuntman, but an accomplished horseman and acquaintance of Flynn, who volunteered to ride as a cavalry extra. Determined to look the part, Budlong insisted on brandishing a real saber instead of a safe prop. As he charged alongside Flynn, Budlong's horse stumbled and pitched forward. Budlong was thrown, and in a split second of dark irony, he landed on his own sword, which he had flung ahead as he fell. The blade stood upright in the ground and impaled him through the abdomen. He was rushed to hospital in Los Angeles, but died of his injury a few hours later. Another rider had taken a hard fall and broken his neck. Rumor had it he was riding drunk after a liquid lunch. A third rider also perished from a fall during the melee, although details are sparse. Errol Flynn was deeply shaken by Budlong's death, having reportedly pleaded with his friend not to use the real saber. The studio attempted to keep the fatalities quiet, fearing bad publicity. They Died with Their Boots On was released in late 1941, with a dedication to the U.S. cavalry, but no mention of the lost men. However, within Hollywood, the incident prompted studios to enforce stricter vetting of who performed stunts. No longer would well-meaning amateurs be allowed into hazardous scenes. It also reinforced the need for on-set medics and better coordination in large crowd scenes. While the film itself is celebrated as a classic Western, its production stands as a grim testament to the very real dangers of big action sequences in the Golden Age. Unconquered, 1947. Cecil B. DeMille was known for pushing his casts to extremes, and his Revolutionary War epic Unconquered was no exception. It nearly cost several people their lives. Filmed in 1946, Unconquered featured fiery battle scenes and a treacherous waterfall stunt, both of which resulted in serious accidents. DeMille, an old-school taskmaster, insisted on using real pyrotechnics for a climactic fort siege. On a summer day at Paramount's ranch, 9 background actors were lined up as Native American warriors, storming a stockade, while crew members launched burning arrows and gasoline-based fireballs at them. The fire rain was meant to look spectacular, and it did, until a flaming projectile struck a patch of ground too close. In an instant, a sheet of fire whooshed over a group of extras. At least 9 men came away with burn injuries. One extra had his hair scorched completely off and suffered severe scalp burns when a flaming arrow landed on him. Others received blistering burns on their arms and backs. Panic erupted as the crew rushed in with fire extinguishers. DeMille, age 65, and suffering from exhaustion, personally oversaw the injured men's care, and, remarkably, resumed filming the next day, albeit with shaken performers and new safety measures in place. But Unconquered wasn't finished exacting its toll. A later scene required a character to go over a waterfall in a canoe. Famed stuntwoman Polly Burson was assigned to double for the heroine in this risky gag. The idea was that Burson would ride the canoe toward the waterfall and grab a hanging tree limb at the last second, letting the empty canoe plunge while she dangled safely. When cameras rolled, Burson missed the limb in the slippery chaos and went over the falls with the canoe. Below was a concealed safety net just under the water's surface. She hit the net face down at high speed. For agonizing moments, Polly was trapped under the rushing water, tangled in the netting and unable to breathe. Crew members raced into the pool and managed to pull her upright just as she was on the verge of drowning. Though badly bruised and half-drowned, Burson survived, coughing up water, but insisting she could do it again if needed. DeMille mercifully declined. These incidents became Hollywood lore, illustrating DeMille's relentless pursuit of realism. In response, Paramount quietly improved its on-set emergency protocols. After Unconquered, even DeMille had to concede that safety harnesses and special effects fakery might have their place. The film opened in 1947 as a hit, but behind its scenes lay stories of courage under literal fire, a behind-the-scenes battle as intense as the one on screen. The African Queen, 1951. John Huston's The African Queen was a picturesque jungle adventure on film, and a punishing ordeal behind the scenes, as the cast and crew found themselves battling the elements and disease in the African wilderness. In 1951, Huston hauled a small Hollywood army to the Belgian Congo and Uganda to shoot this story of a missionary and a grizzled boat captain on a river odyssey. Filming on location was rare in those days, and the challenges quickly mounted. The production set up camp along the sweltering Rookie River. Almost immediately, nearly everyone fell violently ill. The local water was teeming with bacteria, and despite precautions, cast and crew contracted dysentery and malaria in droves. While filming The African Queen, everyone fell sick from drinking the water, except for Humphrey Bogart and John Huston, who drank whiskey. Katharine Hepburn was hit especially hard. She endured bouts of fever and was frequently vomiting between takes, as she later humorously recounted in her memoir, The Making of the African Queen. Crew members collapsed with dehydration. Cinematographer Jack Cardiff noted that at any given time, half the unit was bedridden with illness. Yet two people famously stayed healthy, Humphrey Bogart and John Huston. The pair jokingly credited their immunity to an all-whiskey diet. "We didn't drink the water," Bogart quipped. "I only drank whiskey, and by God, we were the only ones who didn't get dysentery." Indeed, Bogart and Huston unabashedly sipped scotch and gin instead of the boiled river water, and neither came down with the dreaded cruels. Beyond disease, the jungle itself was perilous. The heat and humidity were oppressive. Leeches infested the river, and swarms of mosquitoes attacked nightly. At one point, Huston wanted a close-up of leeches on Bogart's character. When no one volunteered to get actual leeches on themselves, Huston sourced live leeches and kept them in a jar, ready to use. There were encounters with snakes, and crew members had to be vigilant for crocodiles along the riverbanks. Hepburn, a consummate New Englander, was so horrified by the filthy conditions that she tried to maintain decorum, even dragging a small portable shower into camp. Nevertheless, she lost 20 pounds and had to soldier through scenes while severely weakened. Lauren Bacall, Bogart's wife, came along for morale and ended up playing nurse to many, dispensing quinine pills and comfort. The physical toll on the African Queen's team was enormous, but remarkably, there were no fatalities. After 7 grueling weeks, the production wrapped and everyone gratefully left Africa's dangers behind. Upon its 1952 release, The African Queen was lauded as an instant classic. the lush on-screen scenery giving no hint of the misery behind the camera. In Hollywood, though, the film became a prime example of why on-location shoots needed thorough medical planning. Studios learned to send doctors and medical supplies with crews to remote locales after witnessing what Houston's crew endured. The adventure that audiences adore in The African Queen was all too real for those who made it, proving that sometimes the true battle for survival happens off-camera. The Conqueror, 1956. Not all movie set dangers are immediate. Some lurk invisibly, with effects only felt years later. The most chilling example from Hollywood's golden age is The Conqueror, a 1956 Howard Hughes-produced epic starring John Wayne as Genghis Khan. The film's danger wasn't from stunts or pyrotechnics, but from the location itself. Radioactive fallout that turned a Utah desert set into a slow, silent killer. In 1954, The Conqueror shot on location in Snow Canyon near St. George, Utah. Unbeknownst to the cast and crew, this picturesque Red Rock Valley lay downwind of the Nevada test site, where the U.S. government had detonated numerous and dust carried residual radiation. During filming, strong canyon winds frequently whipped up dust storms that the cast and crew inhaled. Some accounts even mention that Hughes had tons of the distinctive red soil shipped back to Hollywood for reshoots, extending the exposure. No one realized the risk. Geiger counters brought to set reportedly clicked like crazy, but the crew shrugged it off. The consequences emerged years later in a devastating pattern. In the decades following The Conqueror, a remarkable number of its personnel developed cancer. The director, Dick Powell, died of cancer in 1963, just a few years after filming. Actor Pedro Armendariz, who played Jamuga, was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 1960 and, facing terminal illness, tragically took his own life in 1963. The leading lady, Susan Hayward, and supporting actress Agnes Moorehead both succumbed to cancer in the 1970s. John Wayne himself, a heavy smoker but otherwise robust, was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1964. He unwittingly set in motion. This tragedy spurred greater scrutiny of film locations. Hollywood became far more diligent in checking environmental safety and consulting experts when staging shoots in potentially hazardous areas. In the lore of dangerous movie sets, The Conqueror remains the most tragic example of long-term fallout. A movie that turned into a real-life horror story for those who made it. How the West Was Won, 1962. MGM's sprawling Western epic, How the West Was Won in 1962, was filmed in Cinerama with 3 directors and an army of stars and stunt performers. Amid its ambitious action sequences, one particular scene nearly cost a stuntman his life, and did cost him a limb. The sequence, filmed in late 1961, involved a harrowing fight atop a moving train, hauling flatbed cars loaded with timber. Veteran stuntman Bob Morgan, husband of actress Yvonne DiCarlo, was hired to perform a dangerous gag. He would double for an actor in a shootout on the speeding train and duck for cover as logs were released from one of the flat cars. On the day of filming, Morgan stationed himself on a flatbed car loaded with several massive logs chained together. At the scripted moment, the idea was that the chain securing the timber would snap, letting the logs roll off to dramatize chaos. Something went terribly wrong with the timing. As cameras rolled, the heavy logs broke loose too early and unexpectedly. Morgan was caught off guard, standing practically in their path. In a split second, the rolling logs barreled into him and crushed him against the side of the railcar. Other crew shouted in alarm and rushed to halt the train. When they reached Bob Morgan, they found him alive but horribly injured. He had been nearly squeezed in half. Miraculously, he survived the massive blunt trauma, but his left leg was mangled beyond saving. Morgan was rushed to a hospital where doctors amputated the leg to save his life. He also suffered a crushed rib cage and pelvis. Production on that segment was halted indefinitely. The stunt community was shaken by the news. Morgan was highly respected, and his accident underscored the extreme risks even veteran professionals faced. MGM, determined to finish the high-profile epic, rewrote portions of the scene and scaled back other stunts. Morgan endured multiple surgeries and a long recovery. His wife Yvonne DiCarlo put her career on hold to care for him, and Bob eventually learned to walk with a prosthetic limb. How the West Was Won hit theaters in fall 1962, with no hint of the near-fatal accident in its final cut. But within Hollywood, Morgan's ordeal became a driving force for improved stunt safety measures. Studios began investing in better planning and engineering for stunts, including breakaway safety devices and rehearsals to protect their performers. The film won 3 Oscars and remains a classic, but its legacy also rides on the lessons learned from a split-second mishap on a moving train that forever changed one man's life. The Flight of the Phoenix, 1965. In July 1965, the production of The Flight of the Phoenix experienced a real-life disaster that eerily paralleled its plot. Legendary pilot Paul Mantz, a 61-year-old Hollywood stunt flyer with a long list of film credits, was hired to fly a cobbled-together plane for the movie's climactic scene. The film's story centers on survivors building a makeshift aircraft from the wreckage of their crashed transport. To depict this, the studio constructed an actual hybrid aircraft with parts of a C-82 transport and a smaller plane, creating a unique, ungainly plane intended to taxi and hop for camera. On July 8, 1965, at an airstrip near Yuma, Arizona, Mantz climbed into the jury-rigged Phoenix for a crucial flying shot. The script called for him to do a low takeoff, skimming just above the ground, a challenging maneuver given the strange craft's uneven balance. On the first take, Mantz managed a short hop. He decided to try another pass for better results. During the second take, as the cameras rolled, Mantz brought the plane down low, kicking up desert dust. Suddenly, the makeshift plane's fuselage buckled from the stress. Later analysis suggested the plane might have hit a small mound, or that its structural weaknesses gave way. In an instant, the aircraft broke apart. The nose slammed into the ground, and the Phoenix cartwheeled, disintegrating with Mantz trapped inside. The crash was horrific and fatal. Paul Mantz was killed on impact. Stuntman Bobby Rose, who was aboard as a co-pilot/observer, was thrown clear and survived with serious injuries, including a pelvis fracture. The entire crew was stunned. They had watched a beloved colleague and aviation legend lose his life before their eyes. Production was halted, and an investigation launched. In the movie, a character remarks, "The man who built this thing was brilliant, but no pilot." Tragically, in reality, it was one of the best pilots who paid the price for the jerry-built airplane. The Flight of the Phoenix was eventually completed using models and creative editing, and released in December 1965. The film is dedicated to Paul Mantz's memory. His death led to a re-examination in Hollywood of aerial stunt standards. Never again would a scratch-built, unproven aircraft be flown for a movie without extensive testing. Modern safety regulations for film aviation were tightened as a direct result of this incident. The haunting realism of the Flight of the Phoenix became all too real on that tragic day, immortalizing Paul Mantz as a daring pilot who gave his life for the craft of filmmaking.